Welcome to another episode of that deep shit where we connect the dots. And on today's episode, we're going to continue our conversation about what is the shadow explained. Okay, so this is part 3. So what we're going to do, we're going to actually dive into the actual shadow of the ego. A lot of people in the comments were actually speaking about this in the first and second videos. So in this one, we're going to specifically talk about it, but even go into more depth about how it affects or how it's different when it comes to the divine feminine. All right. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So here's the thing. The shadow of the ego, or the shadow of the psyche, the shadow itself, resides deep within the ego, within the id of the ego. So if you take a look at the schematics of where it actually hides, this is why it's hard to identify the shadow itself. Now, there's a lot of things that can happen inside of the shadow that can be looked at as being good, or that can be looked at as being bad. But nonetheless, it's neither. It's just aspects that are unknown to the psyche or to the individual. So this is what it means by doing shadow work within oneself, looking at the things that are not visible, the things that you can't see about yourself, the characteristics that could be good or bad. For example, let's just say that you're very controlling, but you don't know that you're controlling, right? But other people can see it. This is part of your shadow. You need to go internal to do the work if you want to adjust it. But like I said, there could be good things that are in the shadow as well, because the shadow only means unknown, okay? So you could be a very artistic person. Very artistic. Like, it doesn't necessarily mean painting, but you can just be artful in the way that you think. And you may not even realize it. This is where people have hidden gifts and talents that they're not really aware of. These hidden gifts and talents reside inside of the shadow. Okay, so this is how, if one goes into a deep meditative state, this is how one could do actual work to adjust these things that are unknown. This is why going deep within themselves, getting to know thyself through meditation or other means is very imperative and very important, right? All right. So how does this apply to the feminine or to the divine feminine? Well, I was in a deep channel. Actually, I was in a deep conversation within a channel. And what happened was I discovered some things. So I discovered that when it comes to the feminine species of humans or human or mankind or genus, right? Genus, genus, right? When it comes to the female species, is that females handle their shadows a little differently than males. Their shadows could be considered a little stronger or a little bit more potent than males' shadows are, but this is only because of the divine feminine principle. And the way that I came to this conclusion is that I noticed that there's a correlation between some females when they're going through their menstrual cycle, either before, during, or after, depending on the female, it's different, right? So some females are not affected as much as others. And please, this is a man talking about a feminine issue. So if I'm wrong about anything, please feel free to correct my ass and leave comments in the comment box below. That's what it's for, right? So with that being said, right, so there's some females that are affected differently than others, but we tend to look at these things as someone being moody or agitated. But what it really is that it's not a proper process of shadows that arise. So what happens is, we all know that blood is sacred just by itself, but there's information about the DNA, or specifically about the lineage of spirit that resides in the blood. Now, when we talk about specifically the menstrual cycle or the menses, there are very potent characteristics and traits that are attached to one's spirit form in that cycle. This is why it's very divine to give birth, or divine as far as the whole birthing or inception and conception process altogether, because of women and who they are and how they're built. Nonetheless, so when these issues arise in some females, it's only because they're not dealing with certain aspects of their shadow. So there is a direct connection between women's menstrual cycles and the full moon. And there's a reason for this. So what happens is that let's see what the internet says about the menstrual cycles and the full moon, because if you look at some reports, they try to dismiss this as a myth. But if you look at other reports, it does give factual basis upon this. And if you know any women, or if you are a woman, if you pay attention, I'm pretty sure you'll see some correlations between the moon and your menstrual cycle. Some. Okay, so menstrual cycles and the full moon.
According to Space.com, more specifically, they concluded that menstrual cycles also aligned with the tropical month 13.1% of the time in women 35 years and younger and 17.7% of the time in women over 35, suggesting that menstruation is also affected by shifts in the moon's gravimetric forces, according to the statement.
We can definitely get into gravity and the moon in the moon video as soon as that happens, right? But nonetheless, there's other accounts that also talk about the percentage of, well, it talks about the 28.3% of women that are affected by it, but the actual hormones that are released during this cycle, as far as hydroxymelanin levels, in the urina sagittis of 3 female volunteers reached in their zenith prior to and during menstruation, gradually declining to their nadir during ovulation. The difference in 6-hydroxymelatonin between menstruation and ovulation was significant, less than 0.0.1. 2 of these 3 volunteers had their zenith in periods of the new moon and nadir 3 or 4 days prior to the full moon, respectively. Now, that's just a little data just to back it up, because I know a lot of people are very hell-bent on the scientific facts of things, because some things can sound or be perceived as pseudoscience. But if you pay close attention and observe your surroundings and nature, you'll see that there's a big connection between this, right? But the point that I'm trying to get at between the shadow and women and their menstrual cycles is that the new moon. So the reason why that there's a new moon is because the moon is blocking the sun actually shining onto the earth. So the moon itself is in a shadow. Okay, so there's a correlation between the new moons and a woman's menstrual cycle. So, but here we go connecting all the dots about what a shadow is. You see, the reason why the shadows come up within a woman during her menstrual cycle is because she herself is divinely connected to the primordial shadow. Divinely. So when the moon is casting a shadow upon the earth, is physically connected to women for reasons I'll get to at the end of this video, and their menstrual cycles is the reason why their shadow selves in their ego or in their psyche comes up so much. The reason why I'm bringing this up is for 2 reasons. One, once you have the information, and if you are a female that, I'm trying to be careful with my words, that struggles with processing issues of the shadow that come up during this time, having this data and this information may make it easy to be identified and to actually do real shadow work. You know what I mean? And most importantly, number two is to showcase the divine connection, because men don't go through that. Women do. And the reason why they do is because of the potential and the power. Remember when I said in the beginning, there are good things and there's bad things, but it's all a perception of what it is. They're just hidden gifts. There's a lot of gifts within those shadows. If you go into those shadows to do those work, you can pull out a lot of beneficial things. And the reason why women are different from men in this aspect is because they are connected to the primordial shadow, which we ultimately have to call source, which we ultimately have to call the divinity, because the divinity is that ultimate chaos of darkness. That ultimate chaos of darkness that ends up becoming shadow, the shadow of the earth onto the moon, the shadow of a tree onto the ground, the shadow which ultimately becomes the shadow of the psyche. But there are gifts inside of that shadow. That's it, you know. And I'm not a woman, but I would be willing to bet that there are a lot of things that you could pull out of that if the work is done. So that concludes the series of the shadow for the time being. I may revisit this if I get enough comments that saying, dude, you're fucking crazy, or whatever. But this is just my 2 cents. This is the notes that I'm sharing with the class, and you already know the drill. NewMysterySchool.com. Log on. Salute.